and welcome everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's discussion explaining tensions around Ukraine, implications for the Eastern Partnership region. Today's event is organized by the Georgian Institute of Politics together with the European Union Institute for Security Studies and the German Council on Foreign Relations, the EaP. The Eastern Europe is at the center of global attention today, and Ukraine is undergoing a trying period, to put it mildly, with Russia's military buildup at the border and high threat of military invasion. Some Western countries started recalling their diplomats from Kiev, and we see already several airlines decreasing their time of landing in Ukrainian airports, confirming their expectations for the worst case scenario. We also see preparations in the neighboring countries and speculations on what this crisis might mean for not only regional, but the global security environment. Russia has been objecting to NATO enlargement and engagement with the neighboring countries for a long time. And now Moscow proposed a legal framework to prevent NATO's enlargement further to the east. Well, that is a move that goes against the principles to post-Cold War agreements. And today it was formally rejected by the US. Today, we are going to discuss the context of this crisis and what it means for the region. Negotiations among big states and political actors about the fate of the Eastern Europe brings back painful history flashbacks. The question is, what should we and could we expect? What could the European Union do to support its Eastern Partnership partners? And what should be the position of those countries that are affected by the current crisis? Today we will focus on Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. And in search for insights on these questions, we are turning to the experts from the region to have a more internal view. And without much further ado, I will turn over the floor to Dr. Stefan Meister, who will moderate today's discussion, who is the head of the Program on International Order and Democracy from the DGP, and look forward to a very interesting discussion today. Please feel free to also send your comments and questions to the Q&A throughout the discussion and presentations and afterwards. And Stefan, the floor is yours, Dr. Meister.
Thank you, Renata, for this introductory remarks. And also I want to thank GIP for setting up this event and cooperating here with EU, ISS, and also DGIP. I think it's a great pleasure. I can also, I think, say this for Stanislav. Yeah, so thank you very much. I have to say, I really like the title Corneli and his team has set up, explaining tensions around Ukraine. It sounds, how to say it, it sounds quite soft in a way. And just to make it clear, just a couple of words also on the conflict from my perspective, just to make it clear, this is not only about Ukraine. But about the European security order, spheres of influence, and the sovereignty of states in Europe. So I think these are really, and I think Renato already mentioned this, these are really higher stakes. Yeah, we are discussing here. I think it raises the questions if the West is ready to accept a discussion on European security and Russia's challenge to sovereignty of states. I think this is really the core also of Russia's questions and proposals. This is about all Eastern Partnership countries, but not only. But it challenges also US role in European security, the future of NATO, and is linked to the demand that Russia has a veto on any security decision in Europe. Even if the Kremlin did not get what it wanted until now, or maybe only partly, let's say it like this, the European Western reaction looks not impressive from a Kremlin's perspective, to be honest. There's no unity on sanctions, no agreement on weapons supply. To Ukraine, there are different analyses and no agreement on what Russia really wants. I think that's also a problem. We really differ in our analysis of what Russia really wants here. And I really would like to hear also from the experts. I will ask also this question. I think Russia is able to divide Europe and transatlantic relations. In my own country, Germany, with a new government, is from the Kremlin's perspective, the weak spot in Europe at the moment. The new German government, and only 2 sentences on Germany, has no consolidated position on how to deal with the Russian challenge. There's a split not only in the society on Russia, but also in the ruling parties, so inside of the parties. I think even worse, Germany is not leading Europe on Russia and weakens Europe's role in this very dangerous situation. And this is really about credibility, reliability, and leadership in Europe. I think it's really for me a very important point. For the Eastern Partnership countries, this is the moment of truth, in my opinion. Is the West willing to pay a price for the post-Cold War European security order, able to deter Russia militarily and with sanctions or not? And Moscow is exactly testing this and has the impression maybe there is some room for negotiations. So I'm only the moderator. We have 4 excellent speakers. I just shortly introduce. We have Volodymyr Dubovic, Department of International Relations, Odessa, Mesnikov National University. Warm welcome from Ukraine. We have Stanislav Sigreju from the EUISS, so the European Institute for Security Studies, also with a Moldovan background, which is useful, I think, also in these days. We have Cornelia Kacia from the Georgian Institute of Politics. I think I don't need to introduce here Cornelia. And we have Andrei Makarichev, who's professor at the Johann Skytte Institute of Political Studies at the University of Tartu. I think he recently authored a very interesting publication on Russian perceptions of Georgia. I think I can also only recommend. My idea is to have like 2 rounds of questions, really not more than 5 minutes, maybe for the introductory remarks. And we will later then take your questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A, also as Renata already mentioned, and we're really interested also in the discussion and in your questions. So I want to ask first to all speakers, so what is this conflict about from your perspective? What effect it has on the Eastern Partnership region, so and what implication it has for the Eastern Partnership countries, and maybe you can also, those who are analyzing their specific countries, maybe you focus also on the countries. And Andrei, I think you're also a specialist on the common or the shared neighborhood. I think you also have this bigger picture and can also bringing in maybe the Russian analysis also of the Russian perception of this. So I think you will speak last, but I think that makes sense for me. And let's start with Ukraine and with Volodymyr. To have your perspective also.
Right. Thank you, Stefan. And many thanks to everyone who contributed to pulling this event together, Cornelia primarily and other partners. It's a very timely endeavor, initiative, and I appreciate it very much so. All these events these days, they're really helpful to us psychologically, but also as experts to better understand what's going on around Ukraine and what's behind this Russian unprecedented pressure on Ukraine these days. And also nice to be in the panel where I actually know all the panelists. It's not often the case, but I do, and some of them are really my good old long-time friends. But going to the subject, I think there are really 2 ways to explain what's going on. One would be the Russian way. They think that the West is besieging them, surrounding them, ignoring their security concerns and pushing countries like Ukraine towards NATO, and there is a threat, and Ukraine plus NATO are willing and preparing to attack Russia in the region. So that's Russian way of explaining what's going on behind this tension, and they just had enough, they say. And then there is a opposite view, which is whoever else is subscribing to it, we all do, or myself, of course, is that Russia is providing this pressure on Ukraine to maybe do differently, as Stefan said already in an introductory note, two things. First, pressure Ukraine, and second, send signals and the shock waves reverberating through Europe, through West. So it's a major signal to Berlin, to Brussels, to Washington. But Ukraine is also very important, of course. So whenever someone says it's just about Ukraine, or someone says it's not about Ukraine at all, it's just sending message to the West, I think both of those views would be wrong. But we need to include two of those explanations, because Ukraine is extremely important. If Ukraine is not somehow subdued or subordinate, using the words of late Zbigniew Brzezinski, then Russia indeed is incomplete. They are a version of the great power of this great power which stood up from its knees is incomplete if Ukraine slips away from their sphere of interest, sphere of privileged interest, or sphere of control. And then the West is also important. And then again, you couldn't really disunite these two. And that's why you find it in the Russian security proposals. You have something on Ukraine, and you have something on basically half of NATO, which have joined the alliance after 1997. Another thing is, of course, the timing. That's also very interesting. Why now? Because there is a sense of urgency. Russia says, right now, you just have to give us a reply, a response to something. Why is it now? What tipped them? What pushed them across this red line of sudden sense of urgency? I don't know. Could it be domestic settings in both countries, Russia and Ukraine? Maybe something going on in Russia within Kremlin. It's not very transparent, but we might suspect there's something going on. Or with Ukraine, Zelensky was seen maybe initially by Moscow as someone who would be easier to deal with than Poroshenko, but then he proved himself as very stubborn and not really following for any, rather falling on any Russian, kind of suggestions that he needs to deliver on Minsk or something like that. Is it really the degree with which the NATO is working with Ukraine? Because the Russians are saying, even without being a member of NATO, Ukraine is now already a kind of de facto member of NATO because there's so much going on. Is it something about Black Sea? The constant presence of battleships from NATO in the region, including my hometown of Odessa? Is it the defender rate of British battleship across the Crimean waters? Maybe it's all this together. And also maybe it's an attempt to use the fact that the Biden is now in the White House, and that's a big subject. One of those who actually thought that it's a good thing for Ukraine and for the US, definitely, that we actually have President Biden now in place. But somehow I sense that Russians decided that Biden being there is a good opportunity, it's a good moment for them to put some pressure, apply some pressure, expecting some return and negotiations and things like that. And most finally, here, of course, the situation is very volatile, and some people are nervous, some are less, some are more. For instance, we are having these hybrid threats. We have recently a major cyber attack. We have attempts on destabilization. We have hundreds of calls about various buildings, including high schools, being mined. And of course, the special squads are going around the city different cities, and looking and not finding the bomb, but that's definitely puts some pressure. Embassies, you said, Ukraine just mentioned yesterday, our foreign minister, that probably premature. Only 4 countries out of 129, I believe, that have embassies in Kyiv decided to start evacuation personnel. And the airlines not flying, that's another thing. But that's also embassies and airlines. I think it's also because of the experience in the past. Because the embassy is definitely a trauma that Americans sustained in Afghanistan when they were withdrawing from Kabul. And that's why they don't want to have something like this repeated. With the airlines, it's also an echo of a tragedy of MH17. So again, of course, the airlines don't want to be caught, or even a Ukrainian airliner, which was dumped over Iranian airspace. So no airline want to repeat that. And finally, the reactions here in Ukraine are diverse, and some people are nervous. Some think it's just a big game. Some people really expect invasion. Zelensky is trying to maneuver here. The last round of communication on Normandy track just happened yesterday in Paris. And if you listen to Russian participants, there is an agreement on Ukrainian side to move forward with Minsk, according to the Russian understanding of Minsk. But if you listen to Mr. Yermak, Zelensky's chief of staff, presidential administration, he's saying no, there should be no direct communication with separatists, and there is no concessions that Ukraine is prepared to give on Minsk. And finally, one last sentence is that the NATO responses, US responses delivered to Moscow And so far, of course, Putin is studying them carefully, diligently, as he should, because he's the only one who makes decisions there. But the reaction is interesting. Well, on one hand, they say we're not full of optimism. On other thing they say we can actually move forward, but on lesser things. But who knows what is actually lesser or bigger issues to them. So it remains very tense, but hopeful for some kind of a escalation going down in the coming weeks and months.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And I can also mention that China is very careful, really watching how US and NATO responds here in Europe, also for its own purposes. Stanislav, I want to hand over to you also this question, and maybe also focusing a little bit on Moldova. Moldova has a lot of other problems, yeah. So, but I think this has also implications, and we also saw in the last months the vulnerabilities also of the Moldovan government. Although I think this is the best government or the best combination we ever had, maybe for Moldova. Yeah, but anyway, maybe also your reading of this conflict very short.
Thank you, Stefan. Well, hi everyone. First, I would join Volodymyr in saying that I'm happy to see so many friends on the panel, and to say that USS is happy to partner with the GAP and Georgia Institute for Politics to organize this topical event. Well, my reading of the conflict is not that original, and you, Stefan, and you, Volodymyr, already provided some insights. I think three things are clear for me. This conflict is about Russian-Ukrainian relations. It's a persistent Russian strategy to turn Ukraine into the client state. Goal is not new. Means since 2014 significantly changed how Russia tries to achieve this goal. Second, it's about region. Of course, Russia tries to use this crisis to solidify its military presence in Belarus. I doubt that after this massive military exercise in Belarus, some pieces of heavy weaponry will go back to Russia. And finally, it's continental thing. Yes, Russia tries to rewrite the norms and change the design of security in Europe. Basically, they try to switch from the role of what they perceive of being norm taker into the unilateral norm maker. Now, two words about Moldova. If I think about re-escalation of a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and I think about spillover effects, Moldova immediately comes to my mind. Yeah? And it comes to my mind at least for three reasons. First one is that Moldova is among few Eastern Partnership states who doesn't share or doesn't have a land border with Russia. Ukraine serves as a sort of a security land buffer. Yeah, if you calculate, there is around 800 kilometers between Moldova and Donetsk, where Russia has de facto military foothold, and there are around 400 kilometers from north of Crimea to Moldovan border. If Russian troops manage to compress this distance, or worse for Moldova, to eliminate this buffer, military threats for Moldova escalate dramatically. Second reason why I think about Moldova in terms of spillover effect is that Ukraine for Moldova is not only a land buffer, but it's as well an emergency provider of electricity or gas when Russia or Russian proxies are cutting off Moldova of electricity or gas. For instance, last time, Ukraine stepped in and provided the technical gas, and even more than that, and some electricity last October, when Russia significantly reduced gas deliveries to Moldova, and Kuchurgan power plant, owned by Russian state company, reduced electricity deliveries to the right bank of Moldova. So a major war between Russia and Ukraine wars deprived of energy resources means that Moldova is more vulnerable in terms of energy security. Unfortunately, current interconnections with Romania, electricity and gas interconnections, are not suffice to cover Moldova's demand in case of cut off of gas and electricity from a Russian side or from Transnistria. And the last point would be that, yes, war would disrupt or will probably hamper Moldova's economic recovery as well. True, European Union is the most important market for Moldovan exports, 67%, yeah. But still, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine are in the top 5 export markets for Moldovan companies. In combined, they account for around 15% of Moldovan exports. So it's not only that the disruption of this trade, this Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia, but also these countries serve as a transits towards the other markets for Moldovan companies. So I would see as well the pain, economic pain for painful repercussions for Moldova in case of war between Russia and Ukraine. And this comes on the top of the fact that Moldovan government is trying to mobilize the limited administrative capacity to conduct essential reforms for Moldova. It's meaning judiciary reform and fight against corruption. So as you can see, situation is not that bright for Moldova in the current regional context.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cornelia. Georgia had its own war with Russia in 2008. Maybe also your assessment of this policy, if there's something to add or where you would say that this is really crucial, and then maybe you can focus a bit on Georgia and what are the consequences for Georgia, which has maybe at the moment not the strongest government in many terms. You need to unmute, sorry.
Thank you, Stefan. I would like to join our colleagues in assessing the situation in and around Ukraine. And actually, of course, it has a huge impact on Eastern Partnership countries and specifically Georgia because of the present situation in Russian-Georgian relations, which I would call probably toxic. Even though the present government is tried from 2012 to start so-called normalization policy, and there was some attempts to engage Russia, it didn't really bring any results. Basically, for a country like Georgia, what's going on in Ukraine actually. We have some sort of deja vu, like we had this kind of story already 2008. Of course, that time, the reaction towards the invasion to Georgia was different, and there were a lot of voices skeptical about Georgia, and then we all remember what was the reaction. Now, I think in case of Ukraine, I hope there will be a different reaction. Of course, we see that reaction is not adequate to the dangers which we have towards the continental security and especially towards the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine. And Ukraine is a very important country, not only for the European perspective, but for countries like Georgia. And I will just go now to the Georgian part and perception in Georgia. As you know, Georgian and Ukrainian relations are very close, and we have strategic partnership last 30 years. Notwithstanding what kind of government we had, maybe exception could be last government because of for obvious reasons, which I'm not going to talk about this. So we really value friendship with Ukraine, and what we see now in Ukraine is very I would say alarming for many Georgians. But at the same time, what I see is that the official reaction from Tbilisi, from the government, is not adequate to the public opinion. Public opinion is very supportive of Ukraine, and if you just see that there was several I would say manifestations, demonstrations to support the Ukraine, and I don't think that the reaction from government is adequate. And there's several. I mean, this is a kind of puzzle which many people actually still don't understand, but. For our foreign audience, I would explain that this is kind of continuation of the foreign policy of Georgian Dream, which actually came with this policy of normalization of the with Russia, and it seems like they, of course, there's a sense that Georgian government doesn't want to irritate Russia, and especially if we look to the statement from the Russian foreign ministry last week, which actually says that the main message was for Georgia that they expect a balanced position from Georgia. What does it mean, this balanced position? Because we are in the same boat with Ukraine in many ways, in terms of NATO membership and in terms of associated trio. So what happens in Ukraine, and that's a very important for Georgia, because we all know that if Moscow will reach its geopolitical aims in Ukraine, the second target, it will be Georgia, because we all know that Kremlin has unfinished business in Georgia as well. So that's why there's a big sympathy and support for Ukraine here, and government is just kind of trying to answer to the pressure which they're getting from the public. But I think what we have now, I would call it muted diplomacy. So just to some sort of like muted tweet support or something like this. This is not really adequate to our strategic relations with Ukraine. What is needed from Georgian side, and I think many people actually who are aware about the situation, that there was expectation that Georgian president or prime minister themselves will visit Ukraine, and like it happened in 2008 when Georgia was in a great situation, Ukrainian president together with Polish and other Eastern European presidents, they came supported to Georgia. So I think we really lack this solidarity. I mean, again, this is not from society. This is from government opposition. And another thing which also worries many Georgians now, and which is also related to the Ukraine situation, is that it's not clear what Georgian government wants to achieve, and what is our aim of our foreign policy. Do we want to be object of the international relations, or do we want to subject? Because and it seems now we are much closer to that. We're just waiting under the shadow of the Ukrainian crisis, and then we have this situation. Let's see what happens. But I think this policy is very counterproductive, and Georgia should be more active to supporting Ukraine, and also because it's not only support of Ukraine, because it's also basically support of its own case. And another problem, which also this Ukrainian crisis brought in Georgia, is with this so-called policy of not irritate Russia. Does Georgia actually giving informal veto power to Russia in foreign policy making? Because if you have this Russia first policy, and if you just only care about what Russia will think about it, and you don't think about your own national interest, where this could lead? Could it lead to the Finlandization of the region or the country? And this is what actually Russia wants in this part of the world. So I think in that sense, there's a lot of questions towards government and in terms of support of Ukraine. And I think as Stanislav mentioned here, he mentioned that about the vulnerability. Of course, at least Moldova doesn't have a direct border with Russia, but in case of Georgia, just 40 kilometers from Tbilisi, we have Russian troops who actually occupy the South Ossetia and Abkhazia. So we feel it much closer. And also one more, and I will maybe final things, then I'll just wrap up. What worries us is that reaction, the perception of Moscow, because when they talk about Ukraine, they didn't really mention Georgia much. It seems like Moscow doesn't, for Moscow, it seems like right now is the problem is Ukraine. And if they will solve this problem with Ukraine, then I think that Georgia will somehow follow the suit. And they don't think that there's a problem with Georgia, which is actually absolutely against of the will of the Georgian society. And I think there's a, how to say, this is a problem for Georgia, how to position itself. And I think this is also not only towards Ukraine, but also how to defend its own interest. I think this is a issue which needs to be debated in Georgia, and we as an organization will try to talk about this and to bring a little bit more insight about Georgian perspective probably next few weeks.
Thank you very much. Finnish colleagues always explain to me Finlandization only works with Finland, but with no other country. So that's an illusion also in other contexts, and I tend to agree to this. Andrei, I just framed the question a little bit different, or maybe a little bit broader. If we look into the Eastern Partnership region, and maybe even beyond, also to Central Asia, do we see a kind of a change also of a Russian policy within the last year? So does Russia has the impression that it has maybe more room with withdrawal of the US, relatively weak Europe, to get maybe more also in terms of impact in the region? Or maybe is it the opposite? If you're looking to Ukraine, maybe Russia's policy on Ukraine failed. Yeah, there was no federalization. The country is much more resilient also to Russian attacks, and it will be also be more able to protect itself with an attack. So there the escalation dominance might also change. Yeah. So how would you see this, or how would you assess this policy?
Right. Being an expert on Russia and someone who comes originally from Russia, I'm of course always expect to somehow rationalize Russian foreign policy, including in the post-Soviet area. Well, in fact, I think there is an illusion, a very significant illusion in Russia that the whole post-Soviet space is an area of Russian influence. And in the most recent publications of some Russian think tanks, this illusory idea has been more than once reiterated. You know, the paradox of the situation is that Russia de facto already has its kind of sphere of influence. If you look at how collective security, Organization of Collective Security has acted in recent events in Kazakhstan. In this sense, I would make a distinction between, let's say, Russian policy toward those countries who are ready and eager to accept Russian dominance, and those who do not want. So it's not about Russia being marginalized. So it's not about that Russia has been intentionally sidelined by someone. No, it's just about a set of countries that do not want to accept Russian hegemony. And in this sense, of course, speaking about rationalization of Russian policy towards Ukraine, which again, I think it's very hard job for me. But in the meantime, there are two, let's say, theories that might explain this escalation and this over-focusing, over-concentration on Ukraine. One is known as a groupthink, when you have a relatively small circle of decision makers who are relatively detached from reality and who might be just entrapped into their own misperceptions and their own mythology. And I'm afraid that's exactly what happens in Russia, in the Kremlin. Because if we look at what the government is trying to achieve, I mean, the Kremlin in a more general sense, it's very enigmatic. And sometimes my impression that the Kremlin intentionally increases this level of obscurity and raises this number of question marks. But in the meantime, we also see that the government is not necessarily and not always supported by, let's say, more or less critical thinking think tankers that might have their own agenda. And in this sense, yeah, there is a kind of discrepancy between different discourses in Russia. And the second logic that I think dominates Russian policy towards Ukraine and which makes it quite irrational is analogical reasoning, which is well-known phenomenon in international relations. So it's just thinking by analogy. So if you did something earlier, that means that you will do that inevitably in the future. And that's also entraps Russia into this, let's say, self-inflicted model of thinking that do not necessarily meet the reality. So in this sense, I think rationalizing Russian foreign policy is really a hard task. And in this sense, what I can propose, just throwing into the debate in my remaining couple of minutes, just a couple of metaphors that might even better describe this very often irrational policy. Well, the first metaphor is something like, fighting with the future or playing with a time machine. Well, in fact, Putin already started playing with time machine by zeroing his presidential terms. Now he wants to do the same internationally. Basically, so what he says is that the West travel back to the 1997, but we in Russia, we stay where we are, which basically, again, is illogical and very irrational. But I think this type of thinking dominates many, many minds in the Kremlin. And the second metaphor is something like from moving from a chessboard, again, with a certain allusion to Brzezinski, to kind of a boxing ring. Because if you look at Russian foreign policy, including in the near abroad, for a couple of decades, well, Russia was trying to play a symmetrical game with the West, in the sense that Russia was imitating the West. Russia was trying to kind of refer or justify its policies through or by direct references to the Western policy. So you have your Kosovo, we have our Abkhazia and South Ossetia. You have your European Union, we have our Eurasian Union. We have your neighborhood policy, we have our near abroad. So now I think what happened with this escalation over Ukraine is that Russia changed this language of imitating the West, and it's instead of competing in let's say institutional and normative terrains or domains in which, of course, Russia does not have any chances. Russia just started playing a military game. Well, of course, to some extent, Russia did play a military game all those 30 years of the post-Soviet transformation, but now it became a clear substitution to other policy tracks that have been completely marginalized in the Russian discourse.
Thank you. It's interesting, but I think it looks from a Western perspective also somehow successful. Yeah, I think Russia owns the escalation dominance. Putin got already the meeting with Biden. Yeah, in a way, and I think there is this ambiguity also leads to a big uncertainty. But I think it's really. I think it's really interesting to have this kind of, so I think we all interpret here something, yeah, so we do not know, but this is, I think, part of the game, and it's maybe even driven also by the Kremlin's policy, what we are discussing and how we are discussing also certain kinds of things. But I agree with you also, let's not overestimate, yeah, the Russian leadership. I think this is maybe also our problem, yeah, and in the end we make it stronger than it is, yeah, in many ways.
Well, maybe just one sentence. Look, I don't think that the Kremlin has a good option. And the whole situation looks bizarre. The whole world is looking and trying to decipher what is this cunning, what is this, smart plan that we just don't notice. I mean, should the Kremlin had a good policy, this policy would be implemented immediately after the failure of these triple negotiations with the White House, with NATO, and with OSCE. It's clear that this pause can be explained by a lack of a good option in the hands of the Kremlin.
Yeah, and it's still a trial and error policy, yeah, in a way. So my idea was to make a second round. I just check what kind of questions we have. Maybe we bring in now questions, and I ask later my second question. I think it's always nice also to bring in the people here, and since we have several questions, so there is an interest to discuss, and I will give you then later also how we come out of this. Yeah, we'll give you maybe in the end also for final round. I will give you a question. So here I would just give to the panel. I would just read out these questions. so the first question is, how do you perceive the potential of the current Russo-Ukrainian crisis to be a turning point for solving the NATO membership issue for Ukraine and Georgia? So what impact it has and how it might help also to solve the issue, in which direction it ever means. I will ask the other questions, and maybe you all have an opportunity to answer to some of them, and I might also add another question. Second question is, Russia has announced today closer military cooperation with Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. The Russian message to the US is clear. Surely this reminds us of dark chapter of Cold War, the Cuban Missiles Crisis. How it has been resolved back then? How will the US react to this challenge? So maybe we ask first, what does this mean? Is this really serious? I would maybe add this question, and how the US could or would react. So even if we don't have anybody here from the US. Then we have the question is, what impact on Armenia? What possible impact on Armenia? And maybe we ask also on the South Caucasus and the whole situation, but they specifically ask here on Armenia. We have question, do you consider the steps yet undertaken by the West as sufficient to deter Russian aggression in Ukraine? What do you see as the most realistic near future scenario in Russia's conduct against Ukraine? So there are a lot of, I don't know how to do it best. Thank you. Question of long-term. So there's a question on long-term results on the Normandy format. Maybe also to Volodymyr here. Negotiations for Ukraine and its reflection impact on the Republic of Moldova and Transnistrian conflict. So this is to Stanislav. Can we say that this is one of the aims of Russian current action? Also, how the federalization idea is perceived both in Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova. So the impact on Moldova, yeah, and how it is perceived. How would the current crisis situation affect EU thinking and policy towards the three countries, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine? Maybe also, Stanislav, to you, also working in an EU institute, yeah? So how this could affect also EU's policy? And I might let me go again to the. So Volodymyr, maybe I would ask to you the question. Do you consider the steps yet undertaken by the West as sufficient to deter Russian aggression in Ukraine? What do you see as the most realistic near future scenario in Russia conduct against Ukraine? I would give this to you, this question. Maybe Corneli on the impact on the South Caucasus, on Armenia, and the situation in the region. I don't know, Andre, maybe also others want to answer on Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, and how do you see this and the US reaction? And then the first question was on how do you perceive the potential of current Russia-Ukrainian crisis to be the turning point? So the membership question, is there, maybe also Corneli and maybe also Volodymyr, do you think this has any impact also on NATO membership? So maybe Volodymyr, you start, and then I can read out more questions later, just not to lose also the questions.
All right. So do we consider steps taken against Russia adequate? Probably not. The fair assessment would be that they're not adequate because, first of all, they haven't by now achieved the result of de-escalation. But they might be working towards this end. So they have been better than many of us were afraid they will be, frankly. Also on this issue of West's disunity, again, through this week of many negotiations, we were impressed of how united this position was, specifically on the NATO-Russia Council Day meeting in Brussels. We all understand that when it comes to what each country within the EU or NATO is prepared to do or how to contribute to helping Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia, there will be divisions, and there are already divisions. But at the same time, the very fact that 30 different countries basically spoke up against the Russian delegation in Brussels and confirmed that that Moscow doesn't have any veto power on membership and things like that, that was already something. And now, of course, each country decides what they can do. Here, Germany, of course, is a big topic in Ukraine in the last week or so. A lot of people are not happy, not necessarily about Germany not willing to provide weapons, to Ukraine, but clearly not being able even to deblock the transfer of some weapons from Estonia. And this morning, for instance, we found out that Canada, which was considered one of the most utmost and ardent supporters of Ukraine, decided not to provide lethal weapons, and that's a bummer. That's a surprise to many Ukrainians. They continue with their military training program of Unifier. They even increased the number of trainers twice, from 200 to 400, but everyone was expecting some weapons as well. You see, there'll be more disunity, and that's what Putin is aiming at. That's one of his reasons why he's doing this. He wants to put West in the stress situation and see how it, how it breaks up, how it's divided, and it's working to some extent, but not very good. On NATO membership, yes, I think it's very important. Another reason why Putin is doing this, he wants to scare and intimidate everyone in NATO that what Russia can do if you even think about Ukraine being a member in the future. And there are plenty of member states, unfortunately, within NATO who are definitely not even willing to think about Ukraine even ever in the future becoming a member of NATO. So the scare tactics, this intimidation is working really well, because there might be some countries within NATO who would still support the idea of giving an EaP to Ukraine. But there will be more, I'm afraid, especially after this escalation, who would be saying, no, let's not even try to go there. Federalization is rejected here in Ukraine. The attempts to federalize Ukraine have been happening a long time, even not since the last Maidan, but the previous Maidan of the Orange Revolution. There was an attempt to push federalization on Ukraine. Not going to happen. There has been, though, decentralization reform quite successful, not without its faults, but something different from federalization. Decentralization is the way to go. Federalization, no. Most finally, on Cuba, Venezuela, and maybe Nicaragua, well, of course, no one in Washington will be happy if you see Russian troops or missiles there, but I don't think they also will have some sleepless nights over that, because so far it's such a huge way between just saying such things aloud in Moscow and actually doing something similar to what they're saying, and therefore I don't think Washington is really afraid of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stanislav. There was a question also in Moldova and Transnistria, and another question I also asked you.
Yeah. I think first on Transnistria, obviously there is attempt on the Russian side to use Transnistria as a model for solving issues in eastern Ukraine. First, it's a model how to conduct talks, because in case of Transnistrian format, there is a direct discussion between Moldovan authorities and representatives of Transnistria. Obviously, Russia tries to impose the same format to Ukrainian side, so far unsuccessfully. And second, yes, this is the outcome of this kind of solution, obviously federalization. It didn't work in case of Moldova. Russia recycled these ideas last October when Moldova didn't have enough gas. Even in such vulnerable position, Moldova rejected these attempts. And I think it's not gonna work as long as we have current president and the government. And I don't think that it will work in case of Ukraine. Second element about EU policy towards trio in case of escalation or in case of major war. I think EU's thinking and policies towards those three countries are constantly changing, especially during the last 1-2 years. It has been somehow reflected in the Eastern Partnership Declaration, which for the first time recognized the existence of a trio. But there were some moves which we haven't seen before. For instance, a cyber dialogue with Ukraine, which was opened last year. Maybe, I'm speculating, maybe similar cyber dialogues can be opened with Moldova and Georgia. Second element, the discussion about sending the new mission to Ukraine, which will train those who train military officers in Ukraine. The content of this mission is still under discussion, but again, the second mission, CSDP mission to Ukraine, this is a new sign of of EU trying to do and find the role in the security realm in those three countries, to do much more in those three countries. Another interesting element is the use of European peace facility to address soft issues of hard security in Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova. If things escalate in Ukraine, I would anticipate maybe increase of the funding within European peace facility, but also different financial priorities within European peace facility. So that EU maybe will finance not only soft security issues, but also hard security issues in those three countries. And then one thing which caught my attention is, well, attempts on the EU side to get the role in the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Active participation in the negotiations or mediating negotiations to open railway and land corridors between those two countries. This somehow leads me to the question, what impact on Armenia, because Armenia so much relies on the transit through Georgia. I think if we have re-escalation of hostilities in the Black Sea or the problems with freedom of navigation, Black Sea, it will have economic impact on Armenia. And if I may, I think in case of Latin America, we have seen this kind of Russian instinct. If there is a problem in the eastern neighborhood and they think that the United States is getting over-involved in the crisis, they send some Navy or strategic bombers to Venezuela or Cuba. We've seen it happening in 2008, we've seen it happening in 2014. So for me, that they are trying to send the message that there will be some military presence or cooperation, higher cooperation with Latin America, is not something new, but I remain skeptical about Russian capacity to project military power on such and sustain military power on such long distances. It's one thing to send your troops to Syria, and it's different thing to cross the Atlantic and to sustain your military presence there. I think I have, and yeah, I forgot to tell you, but the perception of federalization in Moldova, it's super negative. It's not only in the current government, but also on the level of society. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. Corneli, or maybe also a bit broad on the South Caucasus and implications. And you can also pick up other questions when you think you want to add something.
I'll just start maybe uniting these two questions. One was about the impact of authoritarian states, or what would you call illiberal states, on the region, and also about the the South Caucasus. So I think that this issue, not specifically with China, I think China's influence is a little bit different topic, but I will probably pinpoint a few things on the example of South Caucasus. How, for instance, illiberal powers like Turkey, Russia, Iran, trying to set up new kind of regional agenda, especially after Nagorno-Karabakh war. Of course, it has an impact on the region. And as you know, there's a so-called 3+3 format, which was introduced, which was pushed by Turkey and supported by Russia and Iran. As you know, Georgia is not member of this, is not going to be there. But anyway, last meeting in Moscow, they had a Georgian flag there. It's the kind of like invitation for Georgia, even though Georgia officially said that because of this ongoing conflict with Russia, there's no place for Georgia to be in this format. But I think this puts Georgia also a little bit in a difficult situation, because 3-3 format formally, I mean, if it opens up, like trade and roads and closed borders and everything, that's beneficial for everybody, including Georgia. But the problem is that I think from Georgian perspective, it's not sure. Is it about just economical project, or there's some geopolitical component as well there? So I think in general, Georgia feels a little bit isolated, especially after Nagorno-Karabakh war. And that's why, for instance, 3+3 format can be actually discussed from Georgian side, if there will be participation of from the European Union and United States, which is kind of non-starter, at least for the owners of this project at this moment. And that's why I think that what country like Georgia feels is we have this so-called authoritarian pressure on the region. As far as the other countries, I think the impact of the Ukrainian crisis, of course, may have a huge impact on Azerbaijan, because and Georgia, of course, because all this like trade and economical relations are very important, and including Armenia also, because as Stanislav mentioned, Armenia is very much dependent on the trade with Russia. So I think it will be huge challenge for three countries, basically, how to cope with this problem. But hopefully this scenario will not be effective. And then there was also a question regarding NATO membership for Ukraine and Georgia, if this crisis will have some impact. Definitely it will have an impact, because I think the whole idea of this crisis is about that, and maybe not only NATO membership, but also about further cooperation with the EU. Formally, we know that Russian Federation had a different approach to the different post-Soviet countries' approach towards association agreement. We all remember what happened with Armenia, and then we also remember what happened actually with the attempt of Ukraine to sign association agreement with EU. And surprisingly, in case of Georgia, Russia didn't have any objections formally about this, which can be also explained by different arguments. One of them is that they already made it damage to Georgia in 2008, and there was not enough political instruments to pressure Georgia or punish Georgia, especially under the so-called normalization policy. But I think this definitely Western countries who were especially Western European countries who were very unenthusiastic about the membership of Ukraine and Georgia, they have to, after this crisis, I think there should be some sort of solution to this problem, because formally we know that West cannot take this promise back, and we already see this today and yesterday from this official statement, what's going on there. But at the same time, this is what actually Russia wants, that Russia basically wants to close the talks about NATO membership, and then later about EU membership, even though this is not an agenda right now, because Moscow knows that EU membership is not a, it's not a closed perspective for these countries. But of course, because of their geopolitical interest, they're trying to somehow kick out, for instance, case of South Caucasus is very interesting, to kick out the Western actors from the while setting up this regional security complex in South Caucasus. So I think this may apply also to European Union. And as far as expectations also from EU, I think we all understand that EU doesn't have a hard power, but EU member states, especially bigger ones, they can have actually important role in shaping Western foreign policy towards Ukraine and including Georgia. So I think we have to see how this conflict will be managed, and then we'll see what will this crisis will be enough to have some sort of changes in Western policy, and especially Western European policy towards NATO enlargement, or definitely we will have some change there, but I cannot talk now. This will be like positive or negative, so we will see this probably in few months.
Thanks. Andrea, I just want to take also this question from the chat, which is directly to you. On more on a theoretical level, would it be possible to frame the current Russian actions in Ukraine within the so-called post-imperial identity and Russia's biopolitical project? Maybe you can also add this to your answers.
Okay, I want to pick up a couple of points from the previous discussion and from the previous questions. One of them was whether Western reaction was sufficient to deter Russia? Of course, the answer is no. And there is no deficit in the literature, in the different opinions about what can be done more to make this policy more efficient. But what I'm more interested in is why it's not sufficient. And I think we all agree that it's not sufficient. I think one of the reasons that is more or less on the surface is that we in the West here need to prevent escalation of the conflict. Let's not annoy too much Russia. Let's not alienate Russia. Let's not push Russia too much into the hands of China, etc. There are myriads of endless number of reasons. But I think on a more, let's say, conceptual level, what I see is a clash of two different approaches to what we have started this webinar from. I refer to the introductory words of Stefan. What kind of security arrangements and what kind of security architecture we are building and we are expecting and anticipating. And the clash is between a concept that envisages one security community in a wider Europe that would, in one way or another, include Russia. When Putin steps down, but to some extent, this is still a projection of post-1991 liberal project of expanding international society and including more and more members. And there is a second concept, a second mental frame, that we don't need one security community because the price would be too high and there will be too many concessions and too many compromises that we'll need to reach with countries like Russia. So we need two security communities. One is Western and another is whatever Russia wants to build in those areas of the post-Soviet countries that voluntarily want to accept Russian leadership. And I think Armenia, by initiating this CSTO mission to Kazakhstan, clearly deployed itself into this Russia-centric, whatever you call it, zone of influence, sphere of influence, etc. So that's a conceptual question, whether we have one community or we agree that we don't have one community. When it comes to this question of Russian post-imperial identity, well, I would say it's post-imperial, it's post-colonial, it's very much about territories, but it's also very much about, let's say, this messianic idea of taking care and protecting our people, which I in my publications call a biopolitical approach. I don't think that they are contradicting each other. I think it's a mixture, but I will stop here.
Okay, thank you very much. I will just read out more questions. Here's a direct question to Volodymyr from Ian Bond. Why did Zelensky choose this period to step up attacks on Poroshenko and Akhmetov? Not to say that they are good guys, but it seems like a distraction. It's maybe not a good timing to do it also for Ukraine, yeah? And why are he and his national security team playing down the current Russian threat, casting doubt on Western assessments? Maybe Volodymyr, you react directly, and then I will read out more questions.
Okay.
Just not to have this.
Well, thanks for your questions, Ian, and thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Well, it's two great questions, obviously, and not that I know exact answer to them, but I might guess. On the first one, that's definitely not very timely, to put it mildly, to start this decisive stage of persecuting and trying to persecute Poroshenko in the middle of the Russian escalation on our borders. That's how a lot of Ukrainians see it. Even a lot of people who don't have much warm feelings for Poroshenko, they still would agree that maybe you can actually kind of put it aside for a while you have this kind of a huge mass of Russian military on our borders. I think that for Zelensky personally, unfortunately, this war in quotation marks on Poroshenko is even more important than the war against Russia. He definitely lives through the spirit. He never forgot this kind of bad feelings and animosity and acrimony and recriminations against Poroshenko. He could never really leave this behind him. Very revengeful kind of type of behavior, I'm afraid. It also could be, I just thought a moment ago when I saw your question, that that Poroshenko, with his strong credentials on the national security, was becoming dangerous for Zelensky with his lack of such credentials. And that's why in a time of need, when Russian troops are hoarding around our borders, Poroshenko is kind of a better national leader, more seasoned, more experienced, and more tough, and so on. After all, some of his slogans were, one of them was army, military forces. He was seen as a strong supporter of military forces. So maybe that too, kind of put him away a little bit, put him in the shadow, or put him in the front, but by attacking him. And on the second question, another great question. I mean, obviously, when the whole escalation started, Americans kind of rang the alarm, but then for several weeks in Kyiv, people were saying, we don't see anything special, it's been always there. And in some ways it was there, because most of the Russians who were taking part in the spring 2021 escalation, many of them stayed. Much of equipment stayed close to Ukraine's borders. So one of the reasons is that actually, in the first weeks, we didn't see anything that would be dramatically different from previous escalations. Second of all, I think that there is a theory somehow floating here in Ukraine that West and Washington in particular, somehow it's convenient for them. They're playing some game there. They are escalating in response to Russian escalation, and Ukraine is some kind of just a hostage between them two, a playing field, a battlefield, something like that. There is a quite widespread attitude, an opinion that is not many serious experts would share, but in terms of some kind of bloggers and a lot of public on social media, some of them think exactly that. And most finally, they later on, after listening to American intelligence, they agreed, our leaders, that this is a serious menace, a serious threat. But just days ago, they said again, we don't see anything special. So it's basically going in circles, and circles concluded, and nothing special. If this is just a clumsy attempt to stop panic, to calm down the people, you can do it in a better way. Because after all, now Ukraine is well aware of those Russian armies at our doorstep. So you don't, with the circumstances like they are right now around Ukraine, you don't say nothing special, just relax, just go and do, live your lives. So it will still need, I think, when we are through this escalation, hopefully, it will still need some serious research. But also, I think that there will be more and more escalations. I mean, that's another thing. Someone asked earlier, what's the modus of operandi now for Russia? I think it would be some escalatory periods and then non-escalatory periods. And when we are through with this one, again, hopefully, let's wait for another one when they actually not satisfied with the way things are going. Thank you.
There's exactly a question also in this direction on Georgia in 2000. Oh, here the question is: we all remember the escalation timeline and triggers of the war in 2008 in Georgia. NATO couldn't stop this conflict, and Russia's invasion, occupation, militarization of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Don't you think that Russia uses the same scenario in Ukraine, and what will be NATO's reaction on that? If yes, so Andrea also said that Russia is repeating things, but I think Russia is also playing different games. So I don't know, maybe Stanislav or also others can react. I don't know, Andrei, if you want to answer to this question, would be, there's no specific person, yeah, so, but I just want to give it to maybe one person. Andrei?
Well, I will pass it to someone else, maybe to Stanislav or to other colleagues.
Look, I can start, and maybe Corneli, with his huge experience and expertise, exactly. He jumps up. I think we can see certain elements, but I think Russia constantly customizes its strategies according to the needs on the ground. Yeah, and there is a difference. Yeah, in case of Georgia, we had only a couple of days of war, and in case of Ukraine, we are in the war for 8 years. Yeah, so we are in the presence of continuous conflict. Second element is that you have a different geography. Yeah, you can have a potential attack from a neighboring country. Yeah, or at least neighboring country which is not part of a conflict so far, is providing some electronic warfare capabilities, and in cases Russian reconnaissance, electronic reconnaissance capacities in the north of Ukraine. So if in case of Georgia, we had the threat from north and from west, from the sea. In case of Ukraine, you have a threat from north, east, and south. Yeah. So there are many different things, and I think that in 2008, West was in a different mindset, yeah, and the West was still in the process of cutting the defense budgets, still thinking that we can have a reset with Russia. If you remember, there was a EU-Russia modernization partnership shortly after the war. Now, I don't think we are in this situation. I don't think people expect that much from relations with Russia. I don't think there are any initiative to have a new big reset. And then we can see that West slowly is trying to put its act together. You have reinforcements on the eastern flank. Even if you follow today's news, even Germany announced its presence in Romania on the top of what was announced before. So I think we are in a different strategic environment, and West has a different mindset today than it was in 2008. So for many reasons, situation is so different. You know.
Nelly, maybe some thoughts on this?
Yeah, maybe I'll continue what Stan said. Yes, I agree with him that there was different reaction in 2008 war from the West. Many actually people that time were thinking this is isolated case. This was just hot-head Georgians just kind of provoked Russian beer and stuff. So that was kind of mood. At the end of the day, especially from European capitals, that was the assessment, and then we saw some kind of very lukewarm assessment by so-called Tagliavini commission, which actually blamed both the victim and the aggressor in the same way. But I think that right now situation is a little bit different in the approach of the West. Also, Georgia didn't have that time much, support from the Western capitals because of other reasons, because which was mentioned by Stanislav. One of the reasons was, as you know, that after Obama administration came to the power, they started so-called reset actually later, and there were some idealistic I would say approaches that if we engage Russia, maybe attitude of Russia towards neighborhood and basically to international partners will change. And as we know, this kind of failed. But I think we still have this kind of tendencies, especially in U.S. foreign policy establishment. As you know, U.S. foreign policy now too much kind of focus recent decades on China, and China pivot is something which is very important. But at the same time, I don't. I kind of see that they underestimate Russian power. Of course, if you take this, like GDP and other things, which very frequently mentioned, Russian GDP is maybe not enough to have its superpower status, but to say frankly, on the regional level, the Russian power is enough to make geopolitical changes, and this is what we're witnessing today. So I think it's time also to a little bit to take care more about Russia, and otherwise this blackmailing policy of Russia, I don't think it will be stopped, because if we don't have a proper reaction to Russian incursion in Ukraine, I don't think this will be stopped. This is the same way like we were talking, I remember in Washington, D.C. together with Vladimir, and Andrei probably was there as well. When I was speaker then, and I thought that this is not about Georgia. There will be some sort of impact on other countries. And that time nobody believed that this could be Ukraine or anybody else. I can tell you that if this this coercion towards Ukraine will not be stopped, I don't think this is the end of the game, because there might be even more pressure to Baltic states, Poland, and some other countries, especially in what we see now, what's going on in Belarus, basically. And I think that's why I think that there should be a little bit more different approach towards Russia, and especially I think from EU side, that because what I see is many EU member states, they don't have a clear vision what to do with this Eastern Partnership region. They see it kind of gray zone, and then the three countries like Ukraine, Moldova, they see kind of geopolitical orphans, you know. And then, but this gray zone cannot stay there forever. This will be absorbed either by Russia, or there should be some sort of policy from EU side to have some sort of vision about this region, where they should belong. I mean, and especially the three countries, associated countries, the so-called associated trio. And I think there should be some sort of steps taken by Brussels, maybe slowly. We understand that there's some hurdles to promise now some sort of European perspective to these three countries, but I think the sectoral integration of these three countries in European space, I think this is where we can actually do a little bit more, and there is a huge support also in Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia towards this kind of integration towards the EU.
Thanks. Andrei, can I add also, when you answered this question on soft power and hard power, maybe you can also respond to this. There is this question here about that, do 2 decades of conflict show that the US failed with hard power? And would it not make sense to invest more in soft power and smart power tools? I would understand it with regard to Russia. I'm not sure if I'm framing it right, but maybe you can also respond to this question, how maybe to deal with Russia also and with security issues in Europe with other instruments than hard power. But maybe you will first react to this other question.
Yeah, just a very short follow-up to what Corneli mentioned. I think it's not only gray zone. It's something that in one of the most recent publications of one of Russian think tankers was called a borderless space of Eurasia. So basically, this is a new metaphor that the pro-Kremlin analysts try to play with, misrepresenting, misportraying Eurasia as a borderless space, in the sense, I mean, if there are no borders, that means that you cannot trespass, you cannot be a transgressor. And this, I think, is a very dangerous evolution from a gray zone to borderless space, because it justifies all kind of transgressions as something natural, as something like organic. Again, this biopolitical metaphor of a big family, etc., which again is in the hands of the Kremlin. And one more thing, I mean, these parallels with Georgia 2008, yes, most of them are incorrect and beyond imagination, but in one case, I think these parallels might make sense. I cannot completely rule out that in the nearest time, Russia can recognize Donetsk and Luhansk exactly as it did with Abkhazia and South Ossetia. I think that this plan was on the table, and it is on the table in Moscow. And this is something that is more like symbolic rather than a game changer. And frankly speaking, I don't think that it might benefit or strengthen Russian position, because in that case, the game will be, I mean, the theatrical play will be over, the masks will be taken off, sorry for this medical metaphor, and Russia would unveil its real face, its real role in what happened in the eastern Ukraine. So that's why I think Russia is still considering whether this option makes sense or not. When it comes to soft and hard power, well, again, I'm just coming back to my idea of Russia trying to completely change the script and completely change the language register, the language that they speak with the European Union and NATO. They don't want to speak anymore the language of something normative, something institutional, something soft. And they put on the table a big gun, because this is the only instrument and the only tool that they have. They don't have any chances to be successful in soft power project, because they killed their own soft power project. They wasted millions for staging the Sochi Olympics, and then in a few weeks after that, they invaded Crimea, etc. So in this sense, I mean, Russia is not a rational soft power player. After what happened in Ukraine, you can forget about Russian world. After Thomas, you can forget about Orthodox Brotherhood, that again, otherwise might be smartly used by Russian manipulators. But all those cards have gone from their hands. And in this sense, I don't know whether Russia would be sensitive and receptive to any proposals to again come back to this normative / institutional / soft power track. They have thrown it to the basket themselves.
Thank you. I would like to make a final round where everybody answers one question, and this is again to the response. So, what in your opinion would be the right response to this challenge? What are you missing? Maybe also from the Western or from the European and US side. And let's start in the same order with Volodymyr. So, what would you think would be the right response? And you have like 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, it's really hard to predict because we still don't know what Russia wanted to start with this escalation. Did they actually put this security proposals from December 17th, I think, expecting them to be accepted as an entire package? Probably not, because they knew that some of them would be definitely rejected. Then why did they do it? Did they do it because they wanted to, at some point of time, said, see, they don't hear us, they don't want to listen to our concerns, we are going to this military, technical, whatever it means, methods? Or was it actually a program maximum, as we say, where you put some unrealistic things, and then among them you put some things that they really care about, and you think that are feasible to be achieved? And that's probably what is going on now, because the first reaction to the American response and NATO response is that there is a lot for us to work together on, but on secondary issues. So not on Ukraine, not on Ukrainian membership in NATO. And again, it will be up to Putin now to decide, from whom we didn't hear much in the last months. That's already worrying some people, some ominous absence of a great leader for almost a month. So that's kind of strange, but we'll probably hear from him soon on which track he decides to proceed to take. And frankly, we don't know. And we have to keep it strong. We have to, here in Ukraine, to keep our defenses strong and working with our neighbors and working with our allies in the West and elsewhere, getting most that we can in this difficult situation, be it economic, financial assistance, or be it lethal weapons or non-lethal weapons being provided. So basically, we're on the right course. I think we're on the right course, but that still might lead to some carnage.
Thanks. Stanislav?
Yeah, let me try to be as concrete as possible. I think our response in short term, first, keep reinforcing eastern flank in order to ensure effective deterrence effect. Second, use threat of sanctions, because sanctions can work even before they're introduced. Use threat of sanctions in strategic communication. See, for instance, what happened with Russian stock exchange when such announcements were made by US and Europe. Of course, finalize agreement when the new wave of sanctions will be unleashed if Russia moves into Ukraine with military troops. Think about providing to Ukraine a loan to buy gas in order to pass the heat season. Provide Ukraine with more defense capabilities. In the midterm response, I think keep working on the European multi-dimensional defense against conventional and non-conventional threats. Consider increasing EU bomb mission on the border between Ukraine and Moldova. Think about how to help Ukraine to modernize its aging air defense system. And of course, keep working on helping Ukraine and Moldova with energy diversification in the mid to long term. And the last thing, we had a very good question asking what other powers are doing in the Eastern neighborhood. We are so much focused on what Russia and West does, but we don't pay attention, or we didn't pay attention today to what Turkey does, to what China does, to what Persian Gulf countries do, And I think this is the danger, to reduce everything to Russia-Western contest, but it became much more complex. And I would include not only third powers in this analysis, but I would include societies in our analysis, because it's often not between contest between Russia and Ukraine, Russia and Moldova, but it's between Russia and the idea of spheres of influence and societies whose ideas how Ukraine, Moldova, or Georgia shall be organized in sharp conflict with views of Russian leadership. I will stop here.
Thank you also for taking this question. Corneli?
Yes, I also will add a few points. I think what West can, and collective West, I hope it still exists, what it can do, especially in Eastern Partnership countries that support the security of the region, and to give a signal to Russia that West is not going to abandon this so-called gray zone or these countries. And especially 2 or 3 countries like the associated trio, the support is very important, especially from EU side. I know there may not be mood now to have a specific, supporting plan from EU side, but maybe it works to think about how to involve Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova in PESCO, or at least to cooperate there, to have some sort of collaboration, close cooperation there. And also another aspect which can be also done, except just to support the military infrastructure in these countries, there should be also kind of societal support, and also not just to talk about resilience, which sometimes sounds like a kind of excuse for doing nothing. That this is like became now buzzwords in Western capitals, and everybody speaks about this resilience. But of course, we understand why resilience is important for these countries. But resilience it cannot be, for instance, a country like Georgia and Moldova, what they can do in order to be self-sustained in terms of security. Not really much. Of course, there can be like societal resilience, some other aspects, but in terms of hard security, there's nothing that can be done. So I think we really need to empower these countries to have some sort of self-defense, and there are other ways also how to counter Russian disinformation and cyber interference in these countries. And also Russia is trying also to influence the public opinion and to split public opinion in these countries. So there should be some very strong support there in these terms. But I think the most important is also not to give up, because I know that at least excluding maybe Moldova, situation in Ukraine and Georgia is quite tense. In Georgia we have a long-term political crisis, and nobody really knows what will be the solution. We have a pretty much similar situation in Ukraine. There's a huge polarization, but I know that this is very tiresome, and I know there's some sort of Ukraine and Georgia fatigue in the Western capitals, but I think they should not give up. I think this is what Moscow wants there, that after some time that Western capitals, they will decide that there's no point to support these countries, because their security and their democracy is unsustainable. I think this is wrong message. I think even though these countries may not be up to the standards what is required now in terms of democracy and many other points, there should be strong support, and there should be more engagement from European Union, the United States.
Thank you very much. And Andrei, please.
2 short points. One is that I think the European Union in the long term should think more about its security dimension. I know that the conversation is endless, but let's don't forget that security issues are inscribed into association agreements. So it's not something abstract. It's in the legal documents that the European Union has committed itself to countries like Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. So now it's time to translate those let's say, formal commitments to providing and assisting with security into something more tangible. So within this framework, I think fostering negotiations on EU membership for all those 3 countries might, of course, it cannot compensate what is going on in the battlefield, but it might send a very strong political message and give a sense of existential or ontological security. And the second point, I think that the West, again, sorry for this overgeneralization, has to directly appeal to the Russian public. It's unnatural that within the country that is going to start a war, there are no anti-war voices loudly heard and somehow manifested itself. I think German foundations, they do have their offices in Russia still. And I think with all those Zoom and the Skype and other technologies, there are many ways of appealing directly to the Russian public, explaining two things. I mean, just again, translating those geopolitical hysterics into very specific issues. So the war is about human lives. It's your sons, your husbands, your brothers that would be coming back in coffins. And secondly, it's economic losses for your specific families, for your businesses, etc. Of course, I know that the space for any impacts is very limited, especially due to the most recent political developments within Russia, but it's still not completely non-existent. And I think we might think of using different direct ways of appealing to the Russian public, trying to deliver these very simple messages.
Thank you. Let's see how long the German foundation still can work in Russia, either with or without Zoom. So I think there is a strong pressure also on exactly this, what you described on independent media, but also external actors or foreign actors, European actors working with Russian society and civil society. It's getting also more tense. I want to thank you very much. I think that has been a very rich discussion. I think it was really good also in terms of mapping where we are at the moment with this conflict. And I think it proves also that this is really a bigger game. Yeah, this is not just over in 1 or 2 weeks, but I think this is an ongoing crisis, and this is really changing also the rules of the game and changing the whole picture. Yeah, and I think this will have a major impact also on US, NATO policy, but also EU policy. Even if maybe we are slow and look also sometimes here disunited, I think this pushed also even the Europeans, including the Germans, to deal more with security issues and to engage here also more on this. And I think that will also impact on the Eastern Partnership policy. So with understanding all the complaints we have, I think we should also see that there are some steps which are made to just also to end up on a positive note. So I want to thank again GIP and also EUISS and incorporating here, GIP for setting this up. I don't know, Renata, if you want to say a final word. And thanks also for really all speakers. I really enjoyed the discussion very much.
Sure. Thank you very much for such an interesting and fruitful discussion. We have really used up all our time and probably could continue, but it is time to finish today's discussion. Thank you to the speakers, to all the attendees for your active participation. We are considering to have to set up a series of discussions and to continue in the upcoming weeks. So please stay connected. We will send information to all those who have registered for today. And today's discussions recording will also be uploaded online. If you'd like to share it in the future or reference to it. And I look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much, friends and colleagues.
Goodbye, everyone.
See you next time.
Next time.
Thank you very much.